Most people believe their financial problems come from large, obvious decisions. Buying the wrong car, taking on too much rent, or not earning enough income. They look at their budget, see that major expenses are under control, and assume they are doing reasonably well. Yet despite this, their savings grow slowly, if at all. Month after month, the numbers do not add up. The issue is not dramatic, but it is persistent, and it is hiding in plain sight. The real problem is not a single large purchase. It is the accumulation of small recurring expenses that are treated as insignificant and therefore ignored. Daily coffee, food delivery, convenience fees, app subscriptions, and impulse purchases are mentally categorized as too small to matter. Because each transaction feels harmless, it escapes scrutiny. Over time, this creates a structural leak in the budget that most people never properly measure. This is where the latte lie operates. The lie is not that buying coffee is inherently bad. The lie is the belief that small daily expenses have no meaningful impact on long-term financial outcomes. Many people think, I don't spend that much, or it's only a few dollars. That reasoning feels logical in the moment, but it breaks down when viewed over months and years. Consider a simple example. Spending $6 per weekday on coffee and snacks comes to about $30 per week. That does not sound like a problem. Over a month, it is roughly $130. Over a year, about $1,560. Over 10 years, without adjusting for inflation, that is more than $15,000. If that money were invested annually at a conservative 5% return, the opportunity cost over 10 years would be closer to $20,000. At 20 years, the number becomes materially larger. This is not a rounding error. It is a line item that quietly competes with savings, investing, and debt reduction. The reason this problem persists is psychological and structural. Most budgeting systems focus on large categories: rent, utilities, insurance, transportation. These are fixed, visible, and easy to track. Small discretionary expenses are scattered across days and vendors. They do not trigger alarm because they do not feel like decisions. They feel automatic. As a result, people can sincerely believe they are being careful with money while systematically undermining their own financial stability. The consequences are subtle but serious. When savings remain low, people compensate by relying on credit cards, delaying investments, or assuming higher risk later to catch up. Emergency funds stay underfunded. Retirement contributions remain minimal. None of this feels connected to the daily spending that caused it, because the link is delayed and indirect. At this stage, the goal is not to eliminate small pleasures or impose rigid deprivation. The issue is understanding causality. Small expenses are not harmless by default. When repeated frequently and left unmanaged, they become one of the main reasons budgets fail despite good intentions. Until this mechanism is clearly understood, most people will continue to believe they are doing everything right, while their financial position quietly deteriorates. To understand why small daily expenses become financially destructive, it is necessary to look beyond individual purchases and examine the system in which most people operate. The issue is not ignorance or lack of discipline. It is the interaction between income structure, spending behavior, and the absence of a deliberate control mechanism. For most working adults, income arrives in fixed, infrequent intervals, typically bi-weekly or monthly. Expenses, however, occur continuously and in small increments. This mismatch creates a perception gap. A $5 or $8 expense feels irrelevant compared to a paycheck of $2,000 or $3,000. The brain compares the expense to the income unit it just received, not to the total number of similar transactions that will occur before the next paycheck. As a result, the expense feels negligible, even when it is structurally repetitive. Behavior reinforces this problem. Small expenses are usually associated with convenience, time savings, or routine. Coffee on the way to work, lunch ordered during a busy day, or a quick online purchase late in the evening does not feel like discretionary spending. It feels functional. Because these expenses reduce friction in daily life, people rarely question them. Over time, these behaviors become defaults rather than conscious choices, and defaults are rarely optimized. Consider a typical professional earning $75,000 per year in gross income, roughly $4,500 per month after taxes, depending on location. This person budgets carefully for rent, insurance, and retirement contributions. On paper, the plan looks responsible. However, they also spend an average of $18 per day on food and convenience items outside their planned grocery budget. This includes coffee, lunches, delivery fees, and occasional impulse purchases. That is about $540 per month, over 12% of net income, allocated without a defined category or limit. Because no single transaction exceeds $20, it escapes attention. Yet this amount alone could fully fund an emergency account or increase retirement contributions by several percentage points. A second example involves subscriptions and microservices. Streaming platforms, cloud storage, fitness apps, delivery memberships, and software tools often cost between $5 and $20 per month. Individually, they appear trivial. Combined, it is common for households to carry $150 to $300 per month in subscriptions. Many of these services are rarely used. The problem is not the cost of one service, but the absence of periodic evaluation. Without a system to review and justify recurring charges, they persist indefinitely. Standard financial advice often fails here because it focuses on behavior in isolation rather than structure. Advice like cut back on coffee or be more mindful treats the issue as a willpower problem. It is not. People do not fail because they lack discipline. They fail because the system allows leakage without feedback. Tracking every purchase manually is unrealistic for most adults. At the same time, ignoring small expenses entirely creates blind spots that compound over time. Another common recommendation is to focus only on increasing income. Higher income does reduce pressure, but it does not solve structural inefficiency. In practice, small daily expenses tend to scale with income. As earnings rise, convenience spending increases proportionally unless constrained by a system. This is why many high-income earners still struggle to build wealth. The core issue is not the existence of small expenses, but the absence of a framework that defines which of them are intentional and which are simply habitual. Without that distinction, spending remains reactive rather than strategic. Until this layer is addressed, budgets will continue to look good on paper while underperforming in reality. The damage caused by small daily expenses is not accidental. It comes from a set of repeatable mistakes that most people make, regardless of income level. These mistakes are subtle, socially normalized, and rarely framed as financial risks. Over time, however, they shape outcomes more than most major one-time decisions. The first mistake is treating small expenses as non-financial events. Many people mentally exclude daily purchases from their financial planning because each transaction is below a personal attention threshold. Anything under $10 or $20 is perceived as irrelevant. The consequence is that a meaningful share of income operates outside the budget. When 10 to 15% of net income is unmanaged, long-term planning becomes inaccurate by definition. The second mistake is evaluating expenses in isolation rather than as a system. A $7 coffee is not assessed as $7 multiplied by 250 working days per year. It is assessed as a one-off decision. This framing error prevents people from seeing the true annual and multi-year cost. Over 5 years, a $25 per week habit costs about $6,500. Over 10 years, $13,000. Over 20 years, $26,000, before considering investment returns. At a modest 5% annual return, that same $25 per week invested consistently would grow to roughly $41,000 over 20 years. The difference is not trivial. The third mistake is assuming that higher income neutralizes inefficient spending. This is demonstrably false. Consider two individuals. Person A earns $55,000 and controls small discretionary expenses to $200 per month. Person B earns $90,000 but allows $700 per month in unmanaged daily spending. Despite the higher income, Person B often saves less in absolute terms. Over 10 years, Person A may accumulate $60,000 to $80,000 in net assets, while Person B remains close to zero after lifestyle inflation. The limiting factor is not income, but structure. Another common mistake is postponing correction. Because the consequences of small expenses are delayed, people assume they can fix it later. The math does not support this belief. Lost compounding time cannot be recovered. Delaying an extra $300 per month in investments by 5 years can reduce long-term portfolio value by tens of thousands of dollars, even with conservative returns. The cost of waiting is invisible in the short term, but permanent in the long term. The long-term consequences follow a predictable pattern. After 5 years, emergency funds remain underfunded, typically below 3 months of expenses. After 10 years, retirement accounts are materially behind benchmarks required for financial independence. After 20 years, individuals are forced to rely on continued employment, market timing, or higher risk strategies to compensate. At that point, flexibility is reduced, not increased. Importantly, these outcomes occur across income brackets. Many households earning 6 figures still experience financial fragility because their decisions allow small expenses to accumulate without limits. The problem is not earning too little. It is allowing repeated, low-friction spending to compete directly with long-term objectives. At a structural level, money follows rules, not intentions. When small expenses are left unmanaged, they become one of the most reliable mechanisms through which long-term wealth is eroded. The difference between financial stability and stagnation is rarely one major choice. It is the cumulative result of many small decisions that were never treated as decisions at all. The solution to the problem of small daily expenses is not elimination, restriction, or constant self-control. It is structural separation. The objective is to ensure that discretionary spending is intentional, measurable, and capped, without requiring daily decision-making. When the system is designed correctly, behavior follows naturally. The core mechanism is to create a fixed, predefined allowance for variable daily expenses and isolate it from long-term financial flows. This starts by identifying a realistic monthly amount for discretionary spending, such as coffee, meals outside the home, convenience purchases, and minor online spending. For many professionals, this number falls between $200 and $400 per month, but the exact figure must reflect income, location, and priorities. The key is that the number is decided once, not negotiated daily. This allowance is then separated operationally. Instead of being mixed into a general checking account, it is placed in a dedicated account or spending card. Once the allowance is exhausted, discretionary spending stops automatically until the next cycle. No tracking apps, spreadsheets, or constant monitoring are required. The limit enforces itself. This removes the cognitive burden that causes most systems to fail. The logic behind this approach is straightforward. Long-term financial goals, such as emergency funds, retirement accounts, and investment portfolios, require consistency. Small daily expenses disrupt that consistency when they draw from the same pool of money. By separating funds, you prevent short-term convenience from competing directly with long-term objectives. To illustrate the mechanics, consider a household with $4,000 in monthly net income. Fixed expenses and long-term allocations are handled first. $1,600 for housing, $600 for utilities and insurance, $800 for savings and investments. That leaves $1,000 for variable spending. From this, $300 is allocated to the discretionary allowance account. The remaining $700 covers groceries, transportation, and other flexible but necessary costs. The discretionary account becomes a controlled environment. Spending inside it is allowed without guilt. Spending outside it is not. This system is stable because it aligns with how people actually behave. It does not require perfect discipline or constant awareness. It relies on constraints rather than motivation. Importantly, it also scales with income. If income increases, the discretionary allowance can increase deliberately, but only after long-term allocations are adjusted upward first. This prevents lifestyle inflation from automatically absorbing all additional earnings. Another critical component is periodic review, not daily monitoring. Once every 60 or 90 days, the allowance is evaluated. If it is consistently exhausted too early, the issue is not failure. It is information. Either the allowance was set unrealistically low or certain expenses should be reclassified as planned costs. The system adapts based on data, not emotion. This approach is low risk because it does not depend on market performance, leverage, or speculation. It does not assume future income growth. It works under stable or uncertain conditions. Its effectiveness comes from reducing leakage and protecting compounding capital over time. By turning small expenses into a controlled variable rather than an invisible drain, this system restores alignment between daily behavior and long-term financial outcomes. The solution is not about spending less. It is about spending deliberately, within a structure that prioritizes the future by default. When the previous parts are combined, a clear system emerges. The problem is not coffee, convenience, or small pleasures. The problem is allowing repeated low-cost decisions to operate without limits, measurement, or priority. The solution is not behavioral perfection, but a structure that defines where small expenses belong and where they do not. The system has 4 steps. First, income is treated as finite and prioritized. Long-term categories come first: savings, investments, emergency reserves, and debt reduction, if applicable. These are not leftovers. They are fixed allocations decided before discretionary spending is considered. Second, fixed living costs are defined and stabilized. Housing, utilities, insurance, and transportation are treated as non-negotiable obligations and kept within sustainable ratios. This creates predictability and reduces the need for reactive decisions. Third, small daily expenses are grouped into a single discretionary allowance. This allowance is realistic, capped, and operationally separated from other accounts. It is not tracked transaction by transaction. It is controlled at the system level. Fourth, the system is reviewed periodically, not emotionally. Every 2 or 3 months, the allowance and allocations are evaluated based on actual outcomes. Adjustments are made deliberately, using data rather than impulse. Once this structure is in place, the long-term effects become measurable. After 1 year, the most visible change is stability. Emergency funds begin to grow consistently. Credit card balances stop fluctuating unpredictably. Financial stress decreases, not because spending disappeared, but because it became bounded. The individual can see exactly how much flexibility exists without guessing. After 5 years, the compounding effect becomes evident. Redirecting even $250 per month from unmanaged small expenses into savings or investments results in $15,000 in contributions. At a modest 5% annual return, this becomes roughly $17,000 to $18,000. More importantly, the habit of protecting long-term capital is established. Lifestyle inflation is slowed or prevented. After 10 years, the difference becomes structural. The same $250 per month invested consistently reaches approximately $38,000 to $40,000. For many households, this is the difference between financial dependence on continued income and the beginning of optionality. This outcome does not require exceptional returns or aggressive strategies. It results from removing leakage and preserving compounding time. The immediate action steps are straightforward. Start by reviewing the last 2 months of transactions and calculating the average monthly spend on small discretionary items. Do not optimize yet. Measure. Next, set a monthly discretionary allowance that is slightly below the measured average, but still realistic. Transfer this amount into a separate account or card at the beginning of each month. Then, automate long-term allocations so they occur before discretionary spending is possible. This ensures priorities are enforced structurally. Finally, schedule a review date 60 days ahead. The goal is not to judge performance, but to refine the system. The key takeaway is simple. Small daily expenses are not dangerous because they exist, but because they are unmanaged. When they are brought into a clear structure, they stop undermining long-term goals. Financial outcomes improve not through restriction, but through alignment. This approach does not promise rapid wealth. It offers predictability, consistency, and control. Over time, those are the variables that matter most.